On the morning of Wednesday, June 28th, I was in Jerusalem as part of the leadership of the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition, and we boarded a bus to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There we sat around a large circular table in an impressive conference room. The giant doors opened, and into the frame entered a man who is small in size and large in stature, Natan Sharansky. He sat down 2 seats from me. He joined us for breakfast and spoke with us about the challenges inside and outside the state of Israel. Sharansky discussed how judicial reform has revealed subterranean cracks in the foundation of the state itself. He reflected on the new tenor of hyperpartisanship within the Jewish people. As he was speaking, a woman entered the room with a pot of coffee and offered to fill everyone's mug. She started at the opposite end of the table and began to make her way towards me. It was at that point that I looked down at my formal place setting and noticed for the first time the small, elegant, white china tapered mug with a golden inlay of the menorah and the olive branches, the official emblem of the state of Israel. Below the emblem, the word Yisrael glowed in golden Hebrew letters. I studied the mug, and here on Yom Kippur, in front of the Ark and in front of my entire community, I'm ashamed to confess to all of you that my inclination was to take it. But I'm not a thief. So I waved over our representative, a Jewish communities representative from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I asked her in a very hushed tone, "Can I take this mug?" She looked at me with a quizzical expression. Rabbi, you want to steal the mug? "No," I adamantly whispered. "I just want to take it home as a souvenir." She nodded, and I will have to ask my boss. I realized the conversation had gone horribly, horribly wrong at this point. But before I could stop her from leaving the room, she was gone. I'm not sure if she was gone for 2 minutes or 20 minutes, but I imagined that the next person that I was going to see appear in that doorway was going to be the chief of police of Jerusalem. I sat there wondering, who would I call first from prison to explain? My wife Blair or our president, Eileen Berman? And then before I could decide, the door to the conference room opened and she reappeared. She walked directly over to me and she leaned into my ear. My boss would prefer that you not steal the cup. And she asked that you not steal the silverware either. Slach lanu, mechal lanu, kaper lanu. Please forgive me. Why did I want that mug? I've thought about it for months and months. Why do I still want that mug? I think it's because I love Israel so much. And the mug was proof. It was proof that I had reached the Zionist Holy of Holies, that I was sitting in high-level conversations with government officials. You see, the state of Israel was not built by Moses or David, Ezra or Elijah. Our Jewish nation state was built by Jewish men and Jewish women who dreamt and hoped, who abandoned and sacrificed, who debated and fought. They pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed past what the Jewish people ever thought was possible. And as they pushed, Israel welcomed religious Jews and secular Jews, capitalist Jews and socialist Jews, Jews of every color and every language, each group arriving and ready to work and ready to push and push in their own direction. I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. We are a very pushy people. And Israel is the home of the Jewish people. And our home is loud, and it's raucous, and it's absolutely magnificent. This summer I traveled there twice, once as part of the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition on a mission to better understand the peace treaties known as the Abraham Accords. Then I returned with my family, and so many families, some in this room right now from this community, as part of the VBS trip to Israel. Every time my feet touch that sacred soil, I fall in love with her just a little bit more. Israel's beauty can be found radiating from the stones in Jerusalem, the cafes in Tel Aviv, the beaches in Eilat, the hills in the Galilee, the wine in the Golan. Her beauty even permeates the protests and the counter-protests, the Israeli flags and the songs. There we live as Jews, we love as Jews, and we practice democracy as Jews. The protest movement that we've watched develop as a result of the elected government's agenda, all of it is beautiful democracy at play. As worthy as the cause is of democracy, and it's so worthy, it need not be explained to an American congregation. My concern is that in this acute moment, we will push and push and push each other for such a prolonged period of time that will actually push each other away permanently. I fear that this democratic struggle has seeped deep within our people's soul. We've descended into a sort of tribal combat, and it renders us fragile. This conflict within our people still rages as I speak. While it began centered around judicial reform, it has morphed into social strife that feels all-encompassing. I'm not certain that a resolution to the judicial reform, meaning how justices for the Supreme Court are selected, how checks and balances between the Parliament, the Knesset, and the Supreme Court are implemented, I'm not sure that a compromise will end the practice of the protests anymore. There are already many in Israel today, on both sides, who admit that there is some merit to some degree of judicial reform. It has been an issue there for years. There are many in Israel today who distrust this government to oversee reforms that in the moment feel self-serving. This might end in compromise or might end in the collapse of the coalition. It's difficult to analyze an event in real time as it continues to unfold, but the proposed reform has already lit the powder keg of a larger set of social conflicts. The tribal class conflict has produced a government that is a coalition that represents aggrieved elements of society previously considered to be fringe. Its character and prominence in the cabinet causes mainstream, secular, educated Ashkenazic Israel to reconsider its willingness to be ruled by this elected government. I sat with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in June as part of the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition, and we cautioned against an atmosphere of increasing political partisanship that has largely paralyzed American society. We understand what it means to live in a downward partisan spiral with no end in sight. We all know of Shabbat dinners broken up by politics, or those of us in the room who need ground rules to hold family Passover seders. That is not the reality we want for the state of Israel. While the government has succeeded in passing a couple basic elements of judicial reform, the large-scale sweeping change has not yet been passed. Even if judicial reform is settled at this point, the tribal conflict in Israel feels biblical in proportion. no longer named Yehuda, Binyamin, Dan, and Ephraim. The new tribes feel like the urban educated elite that fully participates in Israeli society, serves in the IDF, pays taxes, and maintains liberal values. The ultra-Orthodox, which is the fastest growing demographic in Israel, who feel that their contribution to Jewish life exempt them from any national responsibility whatsoever. The Mizrahi Jews from Middle Eastern and North African countries that form a working second class. The settler groups ranging from established suburbs of Jerusalem out to fledgling outposts of violent teenagers. The former Soviet and Ethiopian Jews who are still hoping for fuller absorption into our home. The non-Jewish immigrants from Africa and the Far East who have arrived to try to make a better life for themselves and their families. And Israeli Arab citizens who should be afforded equal rights as a protected minority of our state. None of that even includes the Palestinians, which is an entirely separate conversation. And within every one of our tribes, there is nuance, there is an impetus to push and push and push to achieve our agenda, and there is absolute certainty that they are right. Israel stands exposed today with different factions trying to take sole possession of the mug. We have brought ourselves into this frail predicament. With all of Israel's incredible achievements on the horizon, peace with Saudi Arabia, and an era of normalization with more and more Arab neighbors in the region, a moment that should be welcomed and celebrated by Jews everywhere. With all of that, our biggest concern as Jews should be the well-being of the Jewish people in our Jewish nation state. And our Jewish nation has not felt this vulnerable in 50 years. Today, this Yom Kippur marks 50 years from a very different kind of Yom Kippur. Instead of community and atonement for the Jewish people, Yom Kippur in 1973 ushered in war and bloodshed. On the eve of Yom Kippur in 1973, the Jewish world gathered to hear the sacred words of Kol Nidrei, just like we did last night. As Abraham Rabinovich explains in his article, Worse Than the Worst Case Scenario, the dreadful hours before the Yom Kippur War, there was only one man that evening who walked the streets of London during Yom Kippur and after with an understanding the rest of the Jewish world completely lacked. Tzvi Zamir was the head of the Mossad, and he had just met with his most important source in the Arab world in London. Late that night, Zamir began an urgent call to arms for the leaders of the State of Israel and the heads of the IDF. According to the archives of the Jewish Agency, the timeline of the day unfolded as follows. At 4 a.m. on Shabbat Yom Kippur, David Elazar, the IDF Chief of Staff, notified Prime Minister Golda Meir of imminent multilateral Arab attacks and proposed defensive preemptive airstrikes similar to the beginning of the Six-Day War. But Golda Meir rejected this option based on political pressure from within Israel and pressure from within the global community. At 8 a.m., Moshe Dayan, Minister of Defense, and David Elazar once again met with Golda Meir, and they decided to initiate a partial mobilization. At 2 p.m., a simultaneous Arab attack began on both the Golan Heights by the Syrians and the Suez Canal fronts by the Egyptians. Egyptian artillery and air force bombarded Israeli army installations in the Sinai. 70,000 Egyptian troops, that's 13 infantry divisions and 1,000 Egyptian tanks, crossed the Suez. Most of the Israeli positions along the Suez, known as the Bar-Lev line, fell in the first 48 hours of the war. 40,000 Syrian troops with tanks entered the Golan Heights, with air support in multiple positions. At 2 p.m., air raid sirens could be heard throughout Israel. It took the rest of the day for most reservists to even reach the front lines. Even after Israel rebounded and won the war, the effects of the war dragged on for years. In his article, How the Yom Kippur War Changed Israel to the Core, Mark Regev wrote that the ceasefire ushered in an eruption of an unprecedented wave of protests over the government's handling of the Yom Kippur War. The conclusion of the war left great social distrust in its wake. How could Israel have been so vulnerable, so fragile in the face of oncoming war? We need to understand, because when we look back at the context of the decisions and the infighting and the partisanship and the adherence to the advice of foreign governments and the absolute certainty that everyone knew best in 1973, I think we have an apt model from which we can learn lessons that we can apply right now. 50 years later, we're falling into a very similar trap. In an article published by the Brookings Institute in 2017, titled The Fog of Certainty, Learning from the Intelligence Failures of the 1973 War, authors Dror Mikman and Yael Mizrahi Arnaud explain that Israeli intelligence held a preconception that the Arabs would not initiate a war with Israel that they could not ultimately win. Israel was wrong. There is an inherent danger in assumptions and preconceptions. The most dangerous preconception today is the perception that I am right and therefore you are wrong. This pervasive thinking can only lead to divisiveness. This thinking ignores 2,000 years of Talmudic tradition that prioritizes Jewish peoplehood and practice over matters of right and wrong, that maintains humility in the notion that one can be right, multiple opinions can be right, nobody may be right, and in all scenarios, each opinion should be considered, honored, and recorded for future generations, especially minority opinions. The opposite of the Talmudic tradition is a winner-take-all perspective. That zero-sum strategy is filled with hubris. Just this past Friday, the editor-in-chief of Haaretz, Avi Meir, wrote an article called "Could the Yom Kippur War Happen Today?" The caption read, "We are older, wiser, more battle-scarred, and better established as a nation than we were then, but we need to keep our hubris at bay." Hubris has led to Jewish tragedy before. Israel and Judah divided King David's unified kingdom, with both sides absolutely certain that they were justified. Judah watched as the northern kingdom was annihilated by the Assyrians, with absolute certainty that it could not happen to us. The Roman military was welcomed by the Hasmonean dynasty, with confidence that the alliance was in the best interest of our people. Collective hubris has always pointed us toward calamity. During the Yom Kippur War, we feared devastation at the hands of our enemies. I think the scenario today is just as serious. I fear the sustained effects of our people's inner divide. It will only be Talmudic logic that ultimately saves us from the precipice. We need Yom Kippur as a people for moments just like this, as a national pause, as a day for our people to reflect, to atone. Forgive my blindness that I could not see your pain. Forgive my conviction that I could not empathize with yours. When we recite the 13 attributes of God, let's emulate them within our own behavior, showing compassion and forgiveness, starting with those in our own families. Let's wipe away tribal loyalties and search for a future together. In 1973, hubris and chaos in Israel led to tragedy. What was our response? American Jews rushed to help. There was a place for us. Not to fight, not to vote. After all, we're not citizens. We rushed to help, to heal, to love. In her article 10 years ago in Haaretz, Dina Kraft wrote, Israel's secret weapon in 1973, diaspora Jews. In it, she recounts stories of American Jewish volunteers who flocked to Israel to help farm in kibbutzim, while the war effort pulled farmers away from their responsibilities. She examined American Jewish medical professionals who served in the IDF to help injured soldiers, who helped work in short-staffed hospitals during the war. In a tenuous time for Israel, the role for American Jews was one of humility, support, and love. We have to offer humility, support, and love to Israel once again. What does that look like? I have a plan for our congregation that includes 3 action items. You can find the strategy in your machzor. It's called Teshuvah, Tefillah, and Tzedakah. Teshuvah in this case is not repentance. It is return. We must return lashuv to Israel again and again in different ways to learn new perspectives, to fall in love with her again and again and again. Our VBS trip to Israel was the beginning of a renewed tradition of trips to Israel here at VBS. Every year, in one form or another, we will offer a VBS experience in Israel. This year, I'm hoping to lead a trip through the United Arab Emirates and Israel to learn more about the Abraham Accords as a pivotal new perspective for Israel's foreign policy moving forward. I hope you join me. God willing, in a few years, I hope to lead a trip through Saudi Arabia and Israel as well. I hope you join me then. There will be Tel Aviv culture trips that study art, and wine tasting trips that visit Zichron Yaakov, and B'nai Mitzvah trips for families who want to celebrate their smachot here at VBS and at our holiest sites in our Holy Land as well. We should send our kids to Israel at every opportunity. Every school trip, every birthright trip that your kids mention, tell them, go. I'm so proud of our VBS Day School for offering the Grinberg Passport to Israel program in 6th grade. Visiting Israel should stand as the culmination of 7 years of study at our day school. Tefillah is prayer. Prayer is a process of self-reflection and self-tuning. Prayer is a divine dialogue about the things that matter. Israel matters. Just as I watched my grandparents pray with deep kavanah in Israel, somehow now I see my children do exactly the same thing. In 2010, Rabbi Shulweiss said, "You can wrap yourself in a talis and tefillin, but if you're not essential to prayer, you're just turning a prayer wheel, and you feel like a fifth wheel. When you feel irrelevant, God is irrelevant." Well, the single most relevant possession we have as a people is the land of Israel. Reflecting on it, even for a moment, draws us into the grand narrative of our people. Right now, Israel requires our love. For generations, it has been our tradition to write prayers on notes and place them in the Kotel, the Western Wall. I carried many such notes from this community with me to Israel on my trip. We have many members here who travel to Israel on a regular basis. We're going to have a dedicated mailbox in our office right down the hall for members to write out prayers and place them in the box. And we'll have other community volunteers take those sealed envelopes to Jerusalem with them regularly to place our prayers in the kotel. Israel will stand at the center of our prayer wheel, at the center of our soul. Tzedakah. Just like those American Jews in 1973, we have to approach Israel with support and humility. American Jews showed up to pick fruit and sweep floors. We took care of Israel while Israelis battled. It is our responsibility again to take care of Israel while she undergoes a very different kind of battle. On the last day of our VBS trip to Israel in August, we spent the day volunteering at Leket, Israel's national food bank. Leket collects fruits and vegetables and meals and distributes them through many other organizations that support Shoah survivors, at-risk youth, Jews and Muslims and Christians that live throughout Israel. Frankly, it is unconscionable that we all visit Israel, stay in five-star hotels, and eat at the most gluttonous breakfast buffets imaginable, while there are Israelis who suffer from food insecurity. When our VBS group volunteered, the founder of Leket and my good friend, Joseph Gittler, came and spoke with us. The morning at Leket was incredibly inspiring. We're forming an Israel Social Action Committee here at VBS, and I'm proud to announce Bill and Barbara Goldsmith and Michael and Jackie Waterman as our first co-chairs from our trip. Every VBS family that visits Israel should volunteer at Leket. Our day school students already volunteer at Leket. Our Israel Social Action Committee will adopt Leket as our first partner organization for this community. Perhaps we'll rotate organizations every few years, finding new, inspiring, non-political organizations will be part of our VBS trips to Israel. This will be a step in offering our support and our love with the utmost humility. We hope to announce a VBS event where we can all spend time and meet Joseph Gittler in late November. We'll send out more information, and if you'd like to be involved in our new committee and support VBS's partnership with Leket, please let us know. We'd love to have you. The Unatana Tokef teaches us that teshuvah, tefillah, and tzedakah can change the course of existence. Now more than ever, as we struggle through this internal challenge, we need to change course. I know that it might sound naive, like a dream, but that's what Israel is. The culmination of dreams, the profound realization of 2,000 years of prayer, the sum total of thousands of small blue tzedakah pushki boxes. Israel is the process of repatching together the tapestry of our people from the terrors of exile. In all of our pushing today, in all of our pushing in different directions, in all of our pushing with different agendas, we cannot afford to tear the tapestry apart. I love Israeli democracy. I love the fighting and the protests and the Hebrew slogans and the songs and the peaceful gatherings. But at some point, this struggle must end. And I want to make sure that everyone here loves Israel in its entirety, with all of its messiness, because it is the messiness of our family. And we are part of that family. And in my family, when one of us faces a challenge, we show up to love and support, just like we all do here at VBS for one another. We need to visit Israel more often, speak up more loudly on her behalf, help her more, love her more. There are those of us who feel exhausted by following the news in Israel, who might think it's time to distance ourselves or just simply take a break. That's not how we act in my house. And it's not going to be how we behave in this community either. We carry a responsibility, not the same as theirs, a responsibility to care for Israel with a wide-angle lens. There will be a day after this inner struggle, and we will know as a community that we were there every step of the way, holding Israel near, loving Israel, and visiting her every year. In 1967, after the Six-Day War, Naomi Shemer wrote the gorgeous anthem, Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. After the liberation of the Old City, she proclaimed through song that it was, in fact, Jerusalem of gold. Then in 1973, after the Yom Kippur War, after more than 2,600 Israelis had been killed, 7,200 Israeli casualties, and almost 300 Israelis captured by the enemy, she wrote a much different Hebrew song, Lu Yehi. After we paid a heavy price because of misjudgment and preconception, because of assumptions and certainty, Shemer offered us the following liturgy, Lu Yehi, may it be. There is still a white sail on the horizon, opposite a heavy black cloud. All that we ask for is may it be, Lu Yehi. And if in the evening windows the light of the holiday candles still flicker, all that we ask for is may it be, Lu Yehi. May it be, please, may it be. All that we ask is may it be, Lu Yehi. I began writing this sermon while sitting on the beach in Tel Aviv. I looked out at the scene before me, at the idyllic scene of our gorgeous home, watching young people play volleyball and surf and laugh and love. Hebrew permeated the air like a spirit of salvation, layer upon layer of beautiful Jewish identity erupting and unfolding before my very eyes. And just beyond that, I saw the passion of the protests and the flags and the internal strife of this moment. And beyond that, I saw fathers and sons rushing out of synagogue 50 years ago to get to the front to never return. I saw the tremendous price we paid. And finally, I saw the mug, our family china, waiting for all of us to use someday. All of those images layered for me within the emanations of my Zionist soul. And I closed my eyes and I offered this prayer, Lu Yehi. Israel, may it always continue to be. Gemar Chatima Tova. 50 years after the botched war of certainty, may we all be inscribed for a good year of wisdom, of humility, of support for our brothers and sisters across the world, of love for Israel always. Lu Yehi.
עוד יש מפרש לבן באופק מול ענן שחור כבד כל שנבקש לו יהי ואם בחלונות הערב אור נרות החג רועד כל שנבקש לו יהי לו יהי לו יהי אנא לא יהי כל שנבקש לו יהי, לו יהי, לו יהי, אנא לא יהי, כל שנבקש לו יהי. מה קול ענות אני שומע, קול שופר וקול תופים, כל שנבקש לו יהי. לא תשמע בתוך כל אלה גם תפילה אחת מפי, כל שנבקש לו יהי. לו יהי, לו יהי, אנא לא יהי, כל שנבקש לו יהי. לו יהי, לו יהי, אנא לא יהי, כל שנבקש לו יהי.
Everyone.
לו יהי, לו יהי, אנא לא יהי, כל שנבקש לו יהי. לו יהי, לו יהי, אנא